On Thursday night, two governments told the world two completely different stories. In Washington, President Donald Trump stood in the Oval Office and declared, in his words, "We ended the war with Iran today." He spoke of a great settlement, a memorandum of understanding, a signing ceremony, possibly in Europe, possibly within days, with the Vice President of the United States in attendance. Meanwhile, in Tehran, at almost exactly the same moment, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson stood in front of state media cameras and said something very different. Iran, he said, had not yet reached a final decision on any agreement. Reports of a deal, merely speculation. To understand how extraordinary Thursday was, you need to see it the way it actually unfolded, hour by hour, because the distance Trump traveled rhetorically in a single day is almost dizzying. Earlier on Thursday, Trump warned he would hit Iran very hard, in capital letters, the digital equivalent of a shout. He vowed to take Karg Island, the tiny but critical hub that handles roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. This wasn't vague posturing. This was a named target, a specific, devastating economic chokehold. Iranian hardliners responded in kind. A senior lawmaker, Ibrahim Rezai, posted a warning that has the kind of stark, almost biblical finality that defines this entire conflict. If you come, you will not return alive. For a few hours on Thursday, it looked like the conflict was about to enter a terrifying new phase, a direct strike on the economic lifeline of a nation, met with promises of total resistance. And then it just stopped. Trump posted to Truth Social that he had canceled the planned strikes. The reason he gave was almost breathtaking in its simplicity. Discussions with Iran, he said, had been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved. He had, as President of the United States, called off the bombing campaign that hours earlier he'd promised would be devastating. By that evening, on a tele-rally for a Georgia gubernatorial candidate, of all places, Trump delivered the headline. I don't know if you heard, but we ended the war with Iran today. From very hard to we ended the war in the span of a single news cycle. Now, before we go any further, let's slow down because the specific language Trump used matters enormously. And it's the kind of language that's easy to miss if you're just skimming headlines. He called it a very strong memorandum of understanding, but he also called it a little conceptual. Sit with that phrase for a second. A little conceptual. A memorandum of understanding is, by definition, not a final treaty. It's a framework, a statement of intent that precedes detailed negotiations. Calling it conceptual on top of that is another layer of qualification. It's the diplomatic equivalent of saying, we have a plan for a plan. What did Trump say the plan actually contained? He focused almost entirely on one thing, Iran's nuclear program. He said Iran had agreed conceptually that it would never have a nuclear weapon, never purchase one, never develop one in any way, shape, or form. He called this 95% of the purpose of the entire negotiation. But here's where it gets interesting. According to a readout from Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's office, after a call with Trump, the agreement Trump described to Netanyahu went further. Netanyahu reportedly thanked Trump for committing that a final agreement would remove Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, dismantle its nuclear infrastructure, limit its missile production, and halt its support for regional proxies. Missile production, proxy support, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the entire axis of resistance architecture. And yet, in his own public comments, Trump hasn't mentioned ballistic missiles or proxies in weeks. While Washington celebrated, Tehran's response was deliberate, careful, and if you read between the lines, quietly damning. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei made 3 distinct points, and each one deserves its own moment. Point 1. No final decision has been made. Reports of a finalized agreement are, in his words, merely speculation. This is a flat denial, but notice it's not a denial that talks are happening. It's a denial that they've concluded. Point 2, and this is the sharper one. Baghaei said, from the beginning, the status of the negotiations was clear to us, and a large portion of the text had already been finalized. However, the Americans kept changing their positions. Read that again. Iran is saying, we had a deal. We were close. And then the Americans kept moving the goalposts. This is Iran positioning itself as the consistent party, and the United States as the unreliable one. It's a direct rebuttal to the
entire framing of Trump's announcement. Trump's narrative is Iran finally caved after a pounding. Iran's narrative is we were ready to sign weeks ago, and Washington kept changing the terms. Point 3. Baghaei said Iran has proven that it does not compromise on what it has defined as its red lines. And then, almost as an aside, but in fact one of the most consequential lines of the entire day, he added that the Strait of Hormuz had become less secure because of US actions.
So if this deal is real, even conceptually real, where did it actually come from? The answer takes us away from Washington and Tehran entirely and toward a country that has become one of the indispensable diplomatic hubs of this entire conflict, Qatar. According to people familiar with the negotiations, Iran passed along its latest draft of the proposed agreement through Qatari mediators earlier this week. This was the follow-up to a sequence that started nearly 2 weeks earlier, when Trump sent back a proposed deal with changes, hardening the language specifically around the nuclear issue. U.S. officials believe that meetings between Iranian and Qatari officials this week helped resolve some of the remaining sticking points. One source described it simply: the mediators hit some breakthroughs. Pakistan, too, was named as an active mediator. And then there's the list Trump gave of countries he said were involved in approving this settlement. A list that is, frankly, staggering in its scope. The United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Pakistan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, and Egypt. 11 nations, Sunni and Shia powers, Gulf monarchies and regional rivals, Israel and multiple Arab states that, in some cases, don't even formally recognize each other. Here's a detail that on its own tells you almost everything about how this announcement actually unfolded behind the scenes. When Trump posted to Truth Social suggesting an imminent agreement and specifically claiming that Israel supported it, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was, at that exact moment, in the middle of a security briefing about Iran. He found out from the Post in real time while discussing Iran with his own security officials. According to an Israeli source, the announcement caught him by surprise. While the politicians traded statements about war and peace, an institution that doesn't deal in politics, at least not directly, released a number on Thursday that deserves far more attention than it got. The World Bank projected that this conflict is dragging global economic growth down to its weakest pace since the COVID-19 pandemic. Global growth, the World Bank said, is now forecast at 2.5% this year, down from 2.9% in 2025. That might sound like a small difference. It is not. In a global economy worth over $100 trillion, a 0.4 percentage point drop in growth represents hundreds of billions of dollars in economic activity that simply doesn't happen. Jobs that aren't created, investments that don't get made, families that don't get the raise, the promotion, the opportunity that a growing economy provides. And then came the warning that should genuinely concern anyone watching this conflict. The World Bank said that if hostilities resume, if the ceasefire that's been more theoretical than real these past weeks actually collapses into renewed, sustained conflict, and if energy supply disruptions through the Strait of Hormuz prove more severe than currently assumed, accompanied by financial stress, global growth could fall to just 1.3% in 2026, from 2.9% to 1.3% in 2 years because of one regional conflict and its impact on 2 narrow stretches of water. The report noted that oil, gas, and fertilizer prices have already spiked because shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remains, in their words, effectively blocked, even amid all this talk of settlements and ceasefires. And the burden of this falls heaviest not on wealthy nations who can absorb the shock, but on developing economies, where the World Bank said per capita income outside of China and India isn't expected to return to pre-pandemic levels until after 2028. If this analysis helped you make sense of a genuinely confusing news day, subscribe. Share it with someone who's been asking, wait, is the war actually over? And let me know in the comments, do you believe this deal is real? Stay sharp, stay skeptical, stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.